Hello and welcome to Pixel Driven, a YouTube channel all about learning Unreal Engine, specifically for automotive rendering. I'll be presenting these videos from the perspective of someone coming from a production background in Maya, and make an effort to draw parallels between the two programs. The first video will be a basic intro to Unreal Engine, including how to get it installed, get signed in, and how to approach increasingly complex ideas and workflows. By the end of this course, you'll have the knowledge needed to create high-end automotive renderings in Unreal Engine, as well as the technical know-how to create a real-time configurator. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask in the comments, and I'll do my best to respond and point you in the right direction. So with that, let's go ahead and dive right in. Alright, so to get Unreal Engine installed, we're first going to need to install the Epic Games Launcher to download the engine. So you can open up a web browser and go to epicgames.com. So from the top right of this page, there's a download button, and this will get the Epic Games Launcher downloaded and saved to your computer. So get that downloaded, get that installed, and then we can open that to see the Epic Games Launcher. It's probably going to default you to the store page here, where Unreal typically sells games. It's got free games that are there every month or every couple of weeks. You can see there's one here now, there's one coming in a couple of days here. And then on the left here, there's three tabs. So you've got the store, library. This is going to contain all the games that you've bought through the Epic Games Store. And then at the bottom, there's Unreal Engine. So on the Unreal Engine tab, along the top here, there's a library tab. So this is going to show all of the versions of Unreal that you have installed on your computer. You can see I've currently got 2 versions installed. And you can launch those using the launch button here, or you can launch your default version of the engine, which you can change here. So if I want to default to 5.3, you can change that. You can launch it, change it to 5.4, and launch it here. So if you don't have any versions installed, which you probably don't, you can click this plus sign right here to install a new version of the engine. And you can choose a version to install all the way back to 4.0. So typically you would want to choose the latest version unless you have something else in mind, and then you would click this install button. So I would typically leave the folder and path to their default, but I would come into this options button here and take a look at the target platforms. Target platforms are platforms that you want to build executable applications for out of Unreal Engine, like a game. So by default, it's got Android, iOS, and Linux checked on. This adds about 20 gigabytes worth of data to your Unreal install download. So I would recommend unchecking these, since the purpose of this class is going to be just to render still images. We're not really going to be building any applications and saving those out. So uncheck those, hit apply, and click install. So that'll take 10, 15, 20 minutes depending on your internet connection to get that downloaded. You can look in the download section in the bottom left here to track what the progress of that is. And once that's done, you'll end up with a tile like this one here. So when you hit the launch button for the first time, you'll see a message right here that says prerequisites. And what that's doing is configuring things in the background in your computer just to make sure that Unreal starts building cache folders, gets things connected properly. It's just a short little thing that Unreal needs to do in order to launch for the first time. Typically, you only need to do that one time. So once you've done that, you can go ahead and launch the engine. So I'm opening up 5.4.2 here. And you'll see this splash screen appear. And at the bottom of it, you'll see a little percentage of what Unreal is doing to get initialized. I've already ran Unreal quite a few times on my computer, so I don't typically have to wait very long for this to go through and do its thing. But when you run it for the first time, you're going to see a message there that says compiling shaders. And that can take several minutes the first time it runs because it's caching a lot of data to your Unreal cache folder on your computer. You'll probably see something like caching 7,000 materials, something to that effect, and that can take some time. But just remember that you typically only need to do that one time, or if you change some properties in your project, you might see that pop up again when you relaunch the engine. So let that do its thing, and then you'll be at the Unreal project browser here. So by default, it shows recent projects. You can see some recent projects that I have in here. And then you've got several categories of templates that you can use as a starting point. So the first one here for games, you've got a blank template, that typically just doesn't really have much in it. It's great. It's a great starting point for just getting a simple project started. And then you've got a few other categories of templates here, like film, video, live events, architecture, automotive, product design and manufacturing, and simulation. And you might think that, since you are interested in automotive rendering, you would use the automotive template as a starting point. I personally have ran into a couple of issues with this, particularly with the material editor in Unreal having a background that's a little bit strange. Like the material swatch in that background is either too dark or it's blown out. I haven't ran into that issue when I start with the game's blank template. So this is the one that I typically use all the time. And just keep in mind that any of these templates, the only thing different between them are the features in Unreal Engine that are turned on or off. And you have the ability to turn those on or off at any time, no matter what template you start with. So really this doesn't matter. Doesn't matter what template you start with. I would prefer to use the game's blank, typically. So I'll create a project on my desktop and I'll call this Intro to Unreal class. You can see here I've got a project name that's longer than 20 characters. So this is a limitation in Unreal that you'll have to deal with. It's good to keep your project names nice and short. So maybe we'll say Intro to Unreal Part 1. Well, even that's too long. P1. Okay. So over here on project defaults, we're going to choose some options here. Blueprint or C++ is going to be, the code that runs underneath the hood in your project, whether we want that to be driven by Blueprint or C++. I typically leave this at Blueprint. I'm pretty familiar with blueprints, so I can write scripts and do things like that within my project. And typically, if I have any production scripts that I need to run, I'll write those in Python on the side and run those within the console window in Unreal. Target platform is going to be desktop because we're going to be rendering out images and videos. Quality preset will be maximum. We'll include the starter content so that we have some assets to look at as we get introduced to the UI. And then we'll eventually be ray tracing. So we'll turn this on. This is just going to configure a couple of flags in the engine by default for us. If you don't have this enabled on project creation, it's okay. You can turn those features on later at any time. Okay, so we'll hit create. We'll see our project show up on our desktop here because that's where we told it to save to. And we'll see our splash screen again. And you'll see this, percentage of progress come up again. And you'll most likely see another material cache happen at this point. I've already ran through this process, so I don't get that. But you'll probably take a few minutes to launch this project the first time. But again, it caches one time. The next time you open the project, it'll open up much faster. You can start taking a look around and seeing what you've got in this blank template project. It's called the blank template project, even though it has this level that it starts you in. It has like this mountain range and sky. This is just kind of a template playground level for you to see something rather than just a black screen. And so right away, we've got the Unreal interface here. So if you're familiar with Maya, you've seen some of these features before. You've got an outliner here, which is very similar to the outliner in Maya, where you've got everything that's in your scene here. You've got a details panel, which is very much like your attribute editor or channel box in Maya. And then up along the top, you've got various menus like the save icon, file, edit window. These are all very similar to the way they work in Maya as well. Under edit, you've got editor preferences and project settings, as well as plugins. So 3 things that you're used to opening pretty often in Maya. You would access them through the edit menu here. Window is going to have a bunch of different menus in here for adding actors and adding panels into your UI. For example, like the sequencer, which is how we're storing animation information in Unreal, but we'll get to that later. Tools, this is a bunch of different sections in here for seeing things like different asset auditing, seeing profiles of your GPU, debugging, all kinds of fun stuff. Build is going to be for building your project into an exe file. This is for actually packaging up games to run on other computers that don't have Unreal installed. Selection, there's going to be some selection tools for working in the editor viewport. Actor is going to be context sensitive depending on what is selected. So if I select this light here and go to the actor menu, and we have all these options in here. Help, there's going to be shortcuts to the documentation, the Unreal website, all kinds of useful links here. So beneath that, you've got this little title bar here. This is the level that you currently have open in Unreal. When you think about levels in Unreal, this is really just like the Maya scene that you have open. So your .ma or .mb file. This is going to be a container that has actors and lights and all kinds of good stuff in there. That is a level in Unreal Engine. So a project in Unreal Engine is going to be like a collection of all kinds of assets, scenes, lights, actors, geometry, materials, all kinds of stuff. And those can all be put into different scenes or levels in Unreal. So currently we're in one that's called Untitled. And I believe this comes in with the game's blank template as the starting map. One quick note on that right away, we're going to change an editor or a project settings here. If you go into project settings, on the left here, there's all the categories for the settings that you want to look at. The one I'm interested in right now is maps and modes. If you go into this section here, you'll see editor startup map and game default map. You can see these are both set to open world. We can customize this to be something else. So I'm going to minimize this. And we're going to create a level to be our startup level for our project. So down at the bottom here, there's this content drawer. If we open this, we can right click in here and say, create a basic asset level. So we'll click that. And we're going to give this a name. I'm going to call it main. This is kind of a common naming convention in Unreal where the level that you want to construct everything in, that is your main level. And we can bring other levels into this using a system that's similar to references in Maya. It's called level streaming. So we'll talk more about that later. But for now, we'll create a level and call it main. You can double click that to go into that level. So now I've got a truly empty level now. And you can see up on this tab here that we're in the main level. So if I open my project settings back up, my editor startup map, I want to change that to be main. And one important thing to know about Unreal is that the path to the asset is usually pretty important. So if we look in the content browser here, you can see I'm under all, content, and then main here. So really I want to see content/main in that path. So we go back to my project settings, maps and modes. If I hover over this, you can see that the primary asset name in that little tooltip says /game/main. That may be a little bit confusing, and this is just a normal thing about Unreal. The whole /game is /all/content. So you can think of all/content as game in this situation. So I'm going to hover over this game/main. We know that that is the asset that we just made. And there's this little magnifying glass icon here. And you'll see this in a lot of places in Unreal. If you click this, it's going to find that asset in your content browser. So you can kind of verify that you've got the right one by doing that. And I'll go ahead and change the game default map to that same main level as well, just in case we want to do anything with that later. It won't be covered in this course, but for example, if you wanted to build an executable for your game, you could have it run on this by default when you run your application, for example. Okay, so we'll close that. So we looked at the content browser a little bit here. There's a lot of detail. There's a couple of things about the UI here that I typically like to change when I'm working in Unreal. For example, this pop-up, pop-down is a little bit annoying to work with occasionally. I don't know if you noticed before, but if I try to open a window like this, and maybe this is covering most of my viewport, if I try to open my content browser, it'll stay behind it. So that can be a little bit annoying to deal with. A lot of times I will open the content drawer and I'll click this button here that says Dock in Layout. If you click that, now it's going to stay in your UI at all times. So you don't have to worry about opening and closing this tab. One other detail about this, if you prefer to have it hidden, you can control spacebar to open and close that content browser. It's supposed to work like a toggle. Right now it's not working for me. You know, it's supposed to open and close with that control spacebar. I don't typically like using that personally. I prefer to have it docked pretty much all the time. So there's our content browser. You can see I've got a lot of filters here set up already. If you were to right click on these and say remove all filters, this is what you would typically see when you start up Unreal for the first time. So this little inverse pyramid with 3 lines here, this is the filters menu. You can open this and check any type of asset that you want to filter to. So like it's going to recursively look all the way down through the hierarchy of your project. So like right now I'm limiting what I can search to the content folder and its contents. We can also go from all to include, you know, engine folders, plugin folders, that kind of stuff. So if I go to the content folder, we've got the starter content. There's lots of stuff in here, like assets, audio, blueprint, HDRs, all kinds of good stuff. If I want to search for things in there, I can open up this and say, maybe show me anything that's a material. So now the material filter is active. You got the little color showing. I'm seeing all of the materials that are in the content folder and every subfolder of the content folder. If you want to turn that filter off, you just click it. So we can add a filter for static mesh, disable that. Maybe add one for skeletal mesh. It didn't find any, you know, so there's no filter. There's no skeletal meshes within the content, starter content. So you can really quickly see what assets are in your project by doing that. So a couple of things here. We've got an empty level. Let's create a couple of assets in here just to start seeing something. Typically when you are adding assets into a level, there's a few ways to do it. One of the fastest ways here is this plus icon. This is going to quickly add to the project, the tooltip says. If you open this, this is a get content menu. So if we want to import stuff from outside of our project, if we want to open Quixel Bridge, which we'll talk about later, we want to open the Unreal Marketplace. And we can also place or spawn actors from nothing here as well. So we can create an empty actor, we can create a character, a pawn. There's a few things here. I will use this menu pretty frequently for lights and shapes and visual effects items. So we'll start by just adding a cube. That's usually something that we would take a look at first in Maya. So to get to a cube, we would do the place actors panel, shapes, and cube. So now we've got a cube in here. So now we have something to look at. We can learn about how to navigate the viewport. The viewport has a few options before we start moving around. You'll see in the top left here, we have orthographic views and perspective views, just like we do in Maya. And these all have their own shortcuts that you can get used to. So if we look in the top view, you can see our asset from the top, left, bottom, back to perspective. But right now we can't really see anything. We can see the outline of it when it's selected, but otherwise it's invisible to us because there's no light in the scene whatsoever. So we should probably add a light as well. So I'm going to go back to the place actors panel, choose lights. And for now, I'm just going to add a directional light in my scene. So our directional light is here. We can move things around with the move gizmo, just like in Maya, which is just like in Maya, it's the W key. So we can move something around. E changes to the rotate tool. So we can change the direction of that light. R is going to scale, which isn't really going to have an effect on a directional light because it's a constant light. And then Q is going to be the selection mode. So it's not going to have move, rotate, or scale activated, but you can still select things. So we've got a light, we've got a cube. Let's throw a floor plane in there as well. So I'll go back to the place actors panel, shapes, and plane. And you'll notice whenever you create assets in this way, it's going to create them at kind of a random point in your level that's sort of near the origin, but not quite at the origin. And if you look at your details panel here, one of the most important things is going to be the transform attributes of the objects that you have selected. So you can see that cube that I created first is not at 000, it's actually at 840.00. You can hit this little U-turn arrow here. This is going to revert all the values back to 0. So now that cube is going to jump over to the origin. So we can do the same for the plane to set that back to the origin. I'm going to hit R to go to scale, and I'm going to scale this plane up. And I'm going to take that cube and pull that up off of the ground a little bit. You can frame your selection just like in Maya by hitting the F key. And we can start looking at stuff. So now is a good time to start talking about the movement controls in Unreal. I really like this about Unreal. We've got quite a few options for navigating a viewport here. So first things first, if you're used to the Maya controls, they're almost exactly the same. So Alt left mouse is going to orbit around where the camera is focusing. Alt right click is going to zoom in and out. And Alt middle mouse is going to pan on the screen. But when you do this one, you might notice that it feels backwards to you compared to how it does in Maya. And that's because in Unreal, it is inverted to what you're probably used to by default. And we can change that. So if you go up to Edit, Editor Preferences, in here, I would recommend just using the search field and search for middle mouse. So there's going to be a checkbox here under controls for invert middle mouse pan. Just turn this on and you'll have a much more familiar feel to the Alt middle mouse movement in the viewport. Okay, so that is the first style of navigation in Unreal. The second option that you have is using just the mouse buttons. So if you hold down just right mouse button and you move your mouse around, it's going to rotate the camera from the position of the camera. So like you're turning your head. If you hold down just the left mouse and push forward and back, it's going to slide the camera without moving it vertically whatsoever. And if you push the mouse left and right, it's also going to turn the camera. So it's kind of a quick way for loosey-goosey flying around your scene without going up and down at all. If you hold down both left and right mouse buttons, it's going to pan the camera, as well as holding down middle mouse button. It's going to do the same thing. You'll kind of notice that holding down middle mouse button and you drag your mouse left, the camera will move right. If you hold down left and right mouse buttons and move the camera left, the camera will move left. So there's a lot of options there to kind of move around. And I saved the best one for last. This is the method that I use most frequently in Unreal. If you hold down right mouse button to aim your camera, you can also press the W, A, S, and D keys to move like a character in a game. So W, S, A, D, A, D. So you can rotate the camera and fly around very quickly with WASD. So in addition to that, you've got the Q and E keys. So E is going to go up, Q is going to go down. E, Q, E, Q. So you can fly around an object very, very fast in this way. And this is the method that I use most often working in Unreal. So one last detail about flying around the viewport. You might feel like this is either really fast or really slow, depending on the resolution scaling on your computer and the size of your level that you're working in, like how big is the landscape that you're moving around. If you've got like a 2-kilometer wide piece of earth that you're designing on, this is going to feel extremely slow to you. So you can speed this up with this menu here, this little camera speed menu. You can see moving this to the right is going to increase that number. So by default, we're at 1, and moving it to the left is going to slow it down. So if I set this to 8, for example, now we're really zooming around very, very fast. And you can very easily slide off into, way off what you're actually trying to look at when you do it that fast. And then inversely here, if we set it all the way down and move, it's going to move very slowly. So a shortcut for this is if you've got right mouse button held, you can scroll on your scroll wheel, and it's going to very finely adjust that value. So if I scroll up, it's going to go higher and higher. And I can always reset this as well. You can see this goes up very high. And there's also a scaler here as well. So this is like an additional way of adjusting how much that affects the viewport. So now it's like crazy, crazy fast. If I set this back to 1, it's not gonna let me change it to 1 until this is at 1. So this is like a multiplier effect. So 1 and 1 is like the default. Might feel a little bit fast to you. Just know that you can change that pretty quickly to adjust the size of your scene, adjust to the size of your scene. All right. So I'm going to slow this down so I have a little bit more control. I usually like working around this speed so I can look at fine details and get close up on stuff without having to fly all over the place and adjust the camera to see that. All right. That's kind of the basics of the UI, creating stuff, moving things around, creating a level. So some other details about this. We briefly looked at the details panel. So if I select this cube again, we'll see, some of the attributes that we have here. If you scroll down here, and I'm actually going to expand this menu so I have a little bit more real estate, you can see a lot of attributes about the object that I have selected, or the actor I have selected. If I scroll down this, you can see there's quite a few things in here. So there's a static mesh section because we're currently looking at a cube, which in this case is a static mesh. It's got a material section. So you can see element 0 has basic shape material assigned to it. And that's why we get this gray look on our object by default. It's kind of like the Lambert 1 of Unreal. And if you keep scrolling down here, there's a lot of sections that have to do with, different aspects of the object that we have selected. So quite a bit of data that we can store here, and lots of attributes. So you'll find that in Unreal, there are a ton of attributes on most of the things that you work with, but everything in Unreal is typically searchable through the details panel, so that you can see there's this little search bar here. So for example, if I wanted to see the visibility attribute, I could just start typing visible. If I can spell it right, it's visible. So then we can see under rendering, there's the visible flag. If I turn this off, our object is invisible. Turn it back on, it's visible again. That is a good kind of segue to talking about visibility in Unreal. Visibility in levels in the outliner, and visibility as an attribute on an object. So if you look in the outliner and you hover over these objects, you'll see this little eyeball icon. You can see the tooltip says toggles the visibility of this object in the level editor. And that is a little bit misleading, because if I turn this off, you might think, all right, cool, I've hidden that object and I can save my level. I'm going to close down Unreal, go home for the day, and come back to work tomorrow. So I'm going to find another level to look at. So we're going to go back to this starter map, or this starter map, come back to my content folder, and go back to our main. Our cube is back, and it's visible again. You might be like, why the heck is that? So this eyeball icon, this is really just like temporary visibility in your level. So hiding stuff this way doesn't actually hide the object. It temporarily hides it so that maybe you can see what's behind it or what's, around it or whatever. If you want to actually hide an object, that's where this attribute comes into play. So if you uncheck visible, save your level, you can go to another map and come back and it'll still be hidden. So just keep that in mind when you're working with objects. Typically you want to construct levels where everything that you want to be affecting the level is visible. You don't want to be hiding half of your objects just to have them there and save them for later. I'll show you some better ways to handle that kind of situation where you want to have like a grab bag of things to disperse throughout your level. I typically wouldn't leave a bunch of things that are hidden with their attribute, in the level, because it can get a little bit confusing, especially if someone else has to open your project. It's really much better to be organized. Okay, so with the cube selected here, we'll make it visible again, and we can go about our business. All right, so that's visibility. So the next thing I want to talk about, and this is pretty early to start talking about this, but we're going to talk a little bit about level streaming. So if you're coming from a background in Maya, especially a production background, you're probably used to constructing scenes with references. And it's a really important part of most production pipelines. If you're not familiar with references, essentially it's a way of bringing other Maya scenes into your Maya scene as a reference. It basically means that those assets don't live in the scene that you have open. They're being referenced in from a different scene. So for example, a lot of times at the VFX shot, you would have a Maya scene that has all of the geometry for all of your assets, all of your characters, vehicles, that kind of stuff. And then you would have another Maya scene that has all of the lighting information. So your sun, your sky, if it's like a studio shot, it's got all of your studio lights in it. And then you'd have another Maya scene that has all of the animation data. So things all get added together to construct the overall or main scene that you're working in to render your shot. So we can work, in a very similar way in Unreal. So what I'm going to do is we'll use this as an example. We'll make a new level and we'll call this geometry level. And then we'll make another new level and call this lighting level. So we'll save both of those by selecting them and hitting Control S. You can also just kind of click off into nothing and do Control Shift S, and that's going to save everything in Unreal. And what we're going to do is go to the Window menu and open up the Levels palette. So here's our Levels palette. I'm going to dock this next to my outliner. You can move and dock just about anything in Unreal. And so you can see right now we've got the persistent level open. That's basically how the level that you have open is going to be represented by default in Unreal within the Levels menu here. So what we can do is say, under the Levels menu here, say Add Existing. And so this is going to say, of the levels in your project, what do you want to add to stream into the level that you currently have open? So we have main open now. We want to add our geometry level and say open. And you'll see that this turned blue. That means that this is now the active level. So if I were to create assets, like add new geometry or new lights, they'll technically live in the geometry level. And you can change this back to the main level by double clicking. And you'll see that it turns blue. So now anything that I create will live in the persistent level, which is currently main. You can see it right here, always at the top left. So I'll Control Shift S. That'll save any changes in my project. And so now we have a level that is being streamed into this one, but it's currently empty. So if we were to double click into that, and there's nothing in the outliner, it's just empty. So we'll go back to main. So one of the great things about level streaming in Unreal compared to referencing in Maya is that you can move assets between them very, very easily. So for example, I want to take my cube and my floor, and I want those things to live in the geometry level. And by the way, in the outliner here, you can display what level an asset lives in using this little gear icon. You can say, my apologies, you can right click at this little top level here and turn on level. So you can see that these assets all live in the main level. So if I want to take my cube and my plane, go back to the levels menu, I can right click the geometry level and say move selected actors to level. That's going to make that the active level again. If I go back to the outliner, you'll see that the cube and the plane live in the geometry level now. So really easy to move assets around. So let's do the same thing for our lighting level. So we'll go back to the levels menu, say add existing, choose the lighting level and click open. It'll become the active level. Let's take our directional light and move selected actors to level. So now we can see in our main level, we've got two levels being streamed into it, geometry and lighting. And in the outliner, I can see that the cube and the plane live in the geometry level and the direction light lives in the lighting level. And these are all working together seamlessly. So this is a great way to organize your scenes. Keep things kind of quarantined to themselves. So I'm going to save everything here again. So I can open up either of these levels. If I go into geometry, you can see it's just got those two objects, no lighting, no anything. You can't even see what's in there. If I open up lighting, it's got just the directional light. If I open up main, it's got those two levels being streamed into it. So one thing to note about level streaming is that there's two kind of methods for it, two options. So you can see this little blue dot next to either of these. That means that these levels both are being controlled by the level blueprint that they're being streamed into. And what that means is this menu here. So there is this open level blueprint. We'll open this up and then we'll take a quick peek and then we'll close it again. This is a level blueprint editor. And basically, when you're constructing a game, the game needs to know what to do when you have a level open and you've got things that are being streamed into it. Like currently, it's not being told to do anything. So if you were to hit play, the start menu on a game, basically nothing would happen. And that's what's going to be the case if we were to try to render something from our project. If this is set to level blueprint streaming the way it is currently, as noted by this blue dot, we try to render, the geometry level and the lighting level aren't going to be present in that render. So you need to fix that. So you can right click a level and say change streaming method from blueprint to always loaded. So that little blue dot goes away. So I'll do the same for the lighting level, always loaded. And I'll double click back on persistent level to make sure that I'm, the main level is the active one. So I'll save all of those. So now if we were to render our scene, all of the sublevels would be coming in and be present in that render. So this kind of seems like a lot, in a part 1 video of an intro to Unreal. But this is a very important topic, at least for me, because I come from a production background. I want to know how to construct my project in a very efficient way, in a way that's easy to debug for multiple people to work on. So this is a great way to do that. All right. So where do we go from here? So we've started the intro to Unreal. Here we've learned how to install. We've gone brief overview of the UI here, the layout of everything, what the viewport looks like, a couple of similarities between Maya and Unreal, and how to get around the viewport, and then a brief overview of level streaming. So in the next classes here, we'll go through an intro to materials, an intro to lighting, an intro to cameras, and an intro to rendering. So we'll do a couple of very basic setups here, get an actual rendered image out and see what we can do about that, what we can use it for, what the render settings are, that type of thing. And as we go on from there, we'll start doing some more advanced topics, like specifically for automotive, we'll prep a car in Maya to bring into Unreal. We'll show you how to do the file export and import, how to prep that car in Unreal, how to set up a 360 spin in a couple of different ways, and then we'll render out that 360 spin using the movie render queue system. All right, so thank you so much for watching, and stay tuned for the next couple of parts here. Thanks a lot.